Oh, Scott, we're trying something new.
We're always trying new things.
We
This
are.
is
It's
our
our
growth
downfall.
mindset at work. Yes. Um,
Yeah, I- it's been a day. We could just sit here and stare at each other and we'd probably both be completely content, but nobody listening would enjoy that as much.
yeah. Well, for those that do listen, if you would like to come and join us in Discord, msclouditpro.com/membership, we're trying something new today. Like normally we sit here and muck with a bunch of faders and things like that. But we're trying to make things a little bit more interactive and do some video as well, in addition to our usual shenanigans. So we shall see how things go.
It's going well till my camera turned off.
It was until you went to Mr. Elgato no signal, but that's fine. I still see your audio, so we'll go ahead and do what we need to do and
I'll go to
make it
my
work.
not as cool camera. How's that? I'll just flip over to this camera.
All good. Let's see.
All right.
Enough about not as cool cameras. Why don't we get into our stuff for today? Where do you want to start? Quite a few things to chat about.
There are quite a few things to chat about. So we talked about the Defender update last week, didn't we? I think we started talking about it. Disappearing links.
We talked about the disaster that was a errant Defender definition update that was pushed out. Long story short, it was deleting links for things like Office apps, deleting shortcuts directly off of folks' desktops. If you happen to be a customer who uses Edge, you were probably having a bad day there because all the LNK files for Edge would have also been deleted, even though those didn't sit in your desktop. They sat in like program files, something like that, which meant that none of your auto whatever launch stuff would work as well. So I think we all had a very fun Friday afternoon last week. I know that personally, I had to go and do some recovery. I heard some folks in the Discord that had some decent ways to recover and repush some links from golden images, things like that, without having to worry too much about it. I actually had to go and repair a bunch of stuff. It was a trip to ye old OneDrive because yay for known folder move. I back up my desktop and documents folders to OneDrive. So it was a little bit of a restore on that side. And then I had to do a repair of Office and Edge. And that seemed to take care of everything. I really haven't had any trouble this week along the way.
Good to hear. And I think Microsoft also came out with some various updates and ways you could potentially go about fixing this. I saw some updates, I think it was on Twitter, that talked about different scripts and different fixes that may work. Because it was just deleting something, I don't know that there's necessarily any guaranteed fix. It kind of depends on what you have, what your environment is like, where you may have backups. Kind of like you said, whether it's in OneDrive or whether it's in another backup. There was some discussion in Discord about some different ways people had gotten around it. So a few different options there.
Yeah. To be clear, there is no way to back up from the Defender side of things. Like Defender deleted the files and they went away. So it's incumbent upon, us as consumers of the product to go ahead and recover in whatever way possible. Like there was no magic, hey, we're going to restore it all script kind of thing that would bring everything back and get it to where it needs to be, which is kind of unfortunate. This is not the first time that Defender has done something like this and been maybe a little bit too aggressive with a definition update that's been pushed out. So hopefully, this doesn't make people think too hard about it and start to run in audit mode, maybe more than they normally would for some of these things. We shall see.
Yeah, what do you think? I've seen some people saying, well, maybe we put Defender on a little bit of a delay from an update schedule too. Like maybe we do a day or two, maybe you do a week delay. I don't know that I would recommend people do like a week delay out of Defender updates, because you also don't want to leave yourself vulnerable. I mean, look what
No.
happened to Rackspace when they forgot to patch some stuff. So I mean, maybe you put it on a day or two delay, because this got noticed right away. If you were on a day delay or a 2-day delay for these updates, you would have been able to avoid this. I don't know that I'd do much longer than that, though.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. Like, you have to find that whole balance for security and protection against actually being able to, I don't know, do your business.
Yeah, what people like to work, well, do their business, or
some people, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, I'm not really sure either. I don't know. I don't have anything else about that. So I'm scatterbrained today. Should we move on to another topic? I'm all over the place.
We can. You want to talk about some happy Azure stuff?
Happy Azure stuff. Are you going to pick happy Azure stuff, or am I going to pick happy Azure stuff?
I will hit and pick some happy Azure stuff.
All right. Pick some happy Azure stuff.
Are you familiar with application health extensions in Azure virtual machines? It's applicable to VMSS Flex and to just non-Flex virtual machine scale sets. So I don't know if you've played around with the health state stuff in general.
I have not. I've played around with Azure AD Sync Health, but I have not played around with application health extensions.
Gotcha. So application health extensions it's an extension that allows you to run a probe, either a TCP or an HTTP probe, locally on the actual virtual machine that is running the application. So say I'm running a web application in a virtual machine scale set, and maybe that virtual machine scale set is fronted by something like an application gateway. So application gateway certainly has its health probes. So we can do things like potentially probe into an HTTP endpoint and say, you know, do I get a 200 response? Okay, I'm going to keep this thing as part of the app gateway and effectively keep it in rotation from the app gateway side of things. But there can be times where maybe you actually want to take different actions on your VM depending on the state of the application that is on it. So even if you don't want to pull it just out of like rotation on the app gateway side, maybe you want to do something like go ahead and reboot it because it's unhealthy. And you just maybe like, hey, I wrote an app and it's in IIS, and it's a real kind of memory consumption beast, and I'm just going to run out of memory at some point. So the easiest way it is to flip the app pool and just give the server a kick and reboot it. So that's kind of what these things do. It's an extension that runs on the virtual machine, and you can have it probe a specific path. Again, it can be TCP or HTTP, including SSL, HTTPS, and it would get back a health signal based on the response. So like, is this thing okay? Is it unhealthy? What's happening with it? And it used to be a kind of binary health state, and it still is. There's this thing called binary health states where you can go in and you can be healthy or unhealthy, but they've extended it, and now they have this thing called rich health states, which is in preview, which extends kind of the enumerations that are available for those health states. So rather than just healthy and unhealthy, you also pick up an initializing and an unknown. So now you can do something like maybe based on that, go ahead and not only pull that VM out of rotation, but be able to do things like reboot that VM instance automatically based on health. Initialization is helpful. Like if you have a new instance that's just coming up and, maybe it rebooted because of planned maintenance or something like that. Now you have this ability to go ahead and actually from the control plane, from like the ARM or management plane side of things, you can go ahead and actually get near real time VM health. I mean, really near time. There's going to be a little bit of latency there just because you got to go through the extension and get its metrics back out. But a pretty nifty kind of thing.
Interesting. It looks like even with some of these, I was looking through, particularly the new ones, like the initializing state. Looks like you can go in and say, like, how many probes until it sets, which means that, like, if you sent 3 probes, it would test it 3 times, and based on what happens those 3 consecutive times, it would potentially flip it to healthy or unhealthy, as well as a grace period, so that while it's initializing, it's kind of like setting a timeout. It appears that if we test this 3 times and in this grace period it still gets stuck initializing, maybe it didn't actually initialize properly and we need to go give the server a kick or something.
Yeah, so the nifty thing here is initialization maybe isn't just like your VM booting up. It's also the extension itself initializing. So you're able to see like state, like if I get an initialization, like an initializing state back, that's actually a good signal for me to know that not only is my VM up and running and maybe it's going through like a reboot motion or an app pull restart, like whatever it happens to be, but my extension is also running. So I'm going to be able to get any of that kind of information back. And it responds to kind of really any 2.0x response. So if you've got something that you're going to query and you're expecting like a 200, a 202, 206, that should all work with this type of probe. The grace period thing is pretty cool. That you mentioned in there. So having the ability to customize not only the number of probes, so maybe for my application over here, I need whatever 4 pings in, and for yours, you want to do 5. Like it takes a little bit longer to start up, and you just know that, hey, it's going to need a little bit of extra time, and maybe you need a custom interval or something like that set around that timing. Works on Linux and Windows. Extension is available on both of them. Supports custom ports. So, it's basically protocol and port. So I'm going to be TCP 22, or I'm going to be HTTP 80. I'm going to be HTTPS 443, whatever it is. And then a custom request path just on the local the local instance. And then super nifty thing about these is because these are just virtual machine extensions, that means they're all supported on the ARM side as well. So you can go in and just do like a put event through, say, like the REST API, or you could bake this into something like your ARM template for your VM scale sets and do extension deploy at scale, which is also really good. Like if this is something that ends up, working out for you. You can also do some other things like there's a batch response available. So you can do like batch health against a scale set that has the extension deployed, which is pretty nice. Requires a little bit of playing around with the REST API today. Like it's like a GET against the REST API for that VM scale set and then the underlying virtual machines within it. But it's all available there. There's also a local log that's output. So if you need to hop in, like say you needed to like enum a log and figure out what it was doing and hop over it, it's available on, again, both sides, Windows and Linux. So that is out in preview, and looks pretty good. Anytime you get more options around these things, right? Like it generally gives you a little bit more flexibility. So you go from healthy and unhealthy to healthy, unhealthy, initializing, and unknown. Ever nebulous.
Yes. Although it's in preview. Don't enter production workloads. There's no SLA for it. Blah, 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 blah. Microsoft standard disclaimer for the rich health stat.
Yes.
That rich health states is the one that's in public preview. The binary, I think you said that, is generally available. So
yep,
use
binary has
rich
been out
health
there a while.
states.
So for anybody who hasn't touched it, you can go play with those today. And the binary ones are similar. It's actually not a too big a lift to go from one to the other. I've been playing around with it a little bit. The ARM side of things, like if you're deploying via template or things like that, the JSON is strikingly similar, which is good because it's all just a health extension at the end of the day. Like it should be pretty darn similar. You're actually just going for kind of the extras that need to be in there that are supported by whichever kind of type handler you're in. So the binary ones are version 1.0 and the new rich ones are version 2.0. And then if you go 2.0, you can take advantage of some extra attributes in your JSON and do those custom intervals and, the grace period and customize the number of probes, things like that.
Got it. Very cool. I do not have a lot of VMs running using this. I'm not adding this to my list, Scott. My ever-growing list of stuff to play with, this is not getting added.
Do you not use virtual machine scale sets?
Not with anything I'm doing today. I don't. I have used them for other stuff, but I don't have anything. Trying to think. Again, most of my clients are in M365. I don't know that I have any clients that I have like active scale sets that I've deployed that I'm working with right now.
Gotcha. If you're not doing VMSS, kind of just vanilla, like every server in this scale set is the same type of thing. I wonder if even for some of the stuff you deploy, like VMSS Flex might be an option. So there's virtual machine scale sets. I want to deploy 10 of the exact same server and they're all going to sit out in this layer. And then there's this other concept of virtual machine scale set Flex, where you can mix and match server types within a virtual machine scale set. So you can pick up some of the niceties maybe around the way like patch cycles run through a data center, or you can actually package an entire application. Like maybe you have that whole thing that you want to be treated holistically. So, you've got that 3-tier app, I got a front end, a middle layer, and I've got my back end database, whatever it is. But you don't have 2 database servers that would go in their VM, their own VM scale set. You don't have 2 middle layers. You don't have 2 front ends, anything like that. You can actually package up like those 3 different things into a scale set as well, and then start to use some of these things like these health extensions against them. Like if I wanted to monitor holistically, like my front end and my middle layer, and they happen to be available in like VMSS Flex, then you could do that as well. I think Flex really opens up some interesting doors when it comes to thinking about the way scale sets work, because I think most of us probably and I fall into this trap too. I think about them as just, hey, here's a layer of a thing that I'm going to be scaling in and out, and it's all the same thing in the same layer all the time, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way at the end of the day.
Interesting. Yeah, that is something. Again, I played with scale sets. I've never played with the health states or those. So it's still not on my list. I have too many other things on my list right now, Scott. One of those that's good to know about, but I'm not going to go spend a bunch of time playing with today or tomorrow.
All right. Well, it's a good thing you don't give me access to your list to just add items to it. So
it is a very good thing. That would be, I'll give you access to my Amazon shopping cart. I mean, not my shopping cart, my wish list. You can add stuff to my wish list.
Give me access to the shopping cart. I can definitely spend some of your money. Easy enough.
No. Nope. No shopping cart for you. Wish list, yes. Shopping cart, no.
All right.
Oh,
What's next on
what's
our
next?
non-shopping list?
Our non-shopping list. This is one that I caught the other day, and I have installed this. I have not gone and hooked it up yet, although I'm in the middle of doing some stuff related to this for a client, so I really should. But it is a public preview extension for Visual Studio Code for Azure Automation. So in the past, and we've talked about Azure Automation before, we've maybe even done some podcasts about it. I've talked about Azure Automation a lot. Part of Azure Automation is being able to create runbooks, PowerShell runbooks, Python runbooks. You can do PowerShell workflow runbooks, all of those. And they have an editor right within the console where you can go write your runbooks, you can write your PowerShell, edit it, update it. You can sync your automation with GitHub or with DevOps so that if you're authoring runbooks locally and you push them up to source control, it'll sync it with Azure Automation. But there has not been like a great way to actively edit and work with these from your local machine. It's always been a two-step of like copy and paste from your local machine up to Azure Automation or publish it to source control and let it sync. Now with this Azure Automation extension, you can create and manage these runbooks right from within Visual Studio Code on your machine. So not only authoring, creating them, getting drafts of them, opening them locally, you can publish them, you can even trigger runs. So you can run a local version. So if you're writing a run book, you want to test it locally, and do that, but you can also start it as an automation job. So there's a whole bunch of functionality here for working with these runbooks in your Azure Automation account, both doing some testing locally as well as being able to trigger and publish and do all of that right with Visual Studio Code now instead of doing it all in the browser in Azure Automation.
So is this all net new, like the local runtime kind of thing? I don't remember seeing that one before. It's been a hot minute since I've touched runbooks, but usually when I'm doing them, I'm either editing right in the portal or I'll just bring my PowerShell locally and kind of iterate on it locally and then swap out the things that I need to swap out, like maybe like a variable for a credential or some type of like saved artifact that I know I need to swap it out to get it over to run in Azure Automation land where things are ever so slightly different.
Yeah, so up until now, that has still been the case. And again, this project I'm actively working on, I've very much done that. Like I even have scripts where my first 20 lines are like, when you copy and paste this between local and between Azure Automation, start at like line 19 or start at line 20, because the top of the runbook is either local stuff or it is Azure Automation stuff. To your point, getting a credential, using a managed identity, any of that type of stuff. So it might still, again, this is something I want to go play with, the whole run local. I don't know how that's going to work if you do have some of those things like getting automation variables or getting managed identities. Like if you run a local version, I can't imagine that doing a connect exchange online dash managed identity is going to work in the run local mode. It does say there is a run local and debug mode, which allows you to add breakpoints, but then does provide support for using internal commandlets like get automation variable. It does say that only non-encrypted assets are currently supported, so you're not going to be able to do like a get credential or any of those.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. It would probably be a bit of a security vulnerability to be pulling encrypted stuff locally.
It'd be cool if it let you pull the artifact out of your runbook service, though, like your actual like deployed runbook resource that's available up there. So if you did happen to have a I don't know, you've loaded a certificate or something in, like be able to grab that out. Like you said, be able to grab an identity out and actually like test it end to end locally with breakpoints. Because that's one of the annoying things about runbooks in the cloud is you tend to sit there, and I think maybe there's a better way to do it, and I've just never looked into it. I still fall back to my old like ASP.NET days and like, you know, VB5, like, hey, let's just do like a response.write and effectively spit that stuff to whatever output stream is available to me based on, you know, is this PowerShell? Is it Python? Like, what is it? And then be able to get some output back that way. And then you just kind of keep iterating, right? But you're always running, yep. You're waiting for it to spin up. You're running, you're waiting for it to spin up. So I'm all for anything that shortens the dev cycle there and kind of eases things up.
Yeah, and that, to your point of doing that type of debug, if you're only in the cloud, that is still the only way to do it. I do that all the time. The amount of write outputs that I put in my Azure runbooks versus what I would do locally, because of the whole there's no breakpoints when you run it in the cloud, is very much a real thing. So this whole run locally in debug mode and being able to add breakpoints, again, it works great. I wish, to your point, like, and maybe we'll see this in a future version of this, but being able to define, like even define certain batches of code. If I'm going to run this, if you could write a PowerShell script and even have like configuration options that are in the cloud, or being able to do like configuration options in the runbook where if you're running locally, go like do a get credential. Versus if you're running in the cloud, go use a managed identity. So you wouldn't necessarily have to rewrite the script based on where you're running it, but you could run certain conditions, or somehow figure out what mode you're in when you ran it for those debug purposes, and doing some of those things where you would have to use an encrypted asset where you're using a certificate for authentication or a managed identity versus a get credential or something like that. But this is definitely a big step in the right direction for a much better experience when you are authoring, testing, working with those runbooks.
Yeah, I was looking at the documentation, like good for you too, as a Mac person here. Like I see it's already supported on Mac OS as long as you're running kind of the right version of PowerShell. So it looks like anything Posh 7.2 or higher, you're good to go. And, you know, kind of any OS you want to do that on, be it Windows, like a Windows Server variant, Mac OS. If you're doing Linux, it looks like they've got support for Ubuntu today. Yeah, that looks pretty nifty. I might have to add this one to my list.
You got a sweet. I finally added something to Scott's list.
It was bound to happen at some point.
It was, sooner or later. So yeah, that's my fun one for the day. And frankly, I need to go get it set up because it might make this experience of the runbooks I'm writing for a client right now be even easier.
Even that much better, huh?
Yes, we are in the middle of PowerShell. It's an interesting one. This would be an interesting one to talk about in a future episode of the podcast, of some of the stuff we're doing with this particular scenario. But any other fun things? Azure Automation. Should we stay in the Azure Automation space for the last few minutes?
Yeah, if you got another one there, we can close out on that.
All right. Well, this was, is this, see, no, now I'm messed up in my head. This tracking and inventory is not, this is Azure Automation. That's what I thought. Making me go crazy. Azure Automation, change tracking and inventory. This always makes, so Scott, I have a question for you, sort of related to this. Does having change tracking and inventory within the automation still makes sense to you? This is one that's never completely made sense to me why it's in the automation service.
I think these are weird ones. So it makes sense from the perspective of You have a bunch of things that are running out there that you need to query on a schedule and get some data back from them. You kind of have this push and pull mechanism that's already available to you within the Azure Automation service, which can be kind of neat, right? When you think about like hybrid workers and things like that. But the change tracking piece is interesting because it needs some place to persist all that data. So you end up with this quasi like, hey, I have an Azure Automation thing, which is effectively, I mean, it's a cron service at that point, right? It's a scheduler that's just running for you and doing pushes and pulls of stuff. But ultimately, like the data is persisted over in log analytics. And then for, whatever reason, the decision was made to surface that data inside of Azure Automation. Like there was an existing blade someplace in the portal and somebody said like, ooh, I can cram this in here. It's really one of those things like, I don't know, hindsight being 2020, it should probably live over within Azure Monitor. And then behind the scenes, just leverage the same resources. So continue to leverage log analytics, which tons of monitor services do, like when you're pushing, say, like diagnostics from a VM or a storage account, something like that. And just be transparent in that you're doing a little bit of like management on behalf of by leveraging the actual Azure Automation account to go out and do that stuff. So whichever kind of resource ends up being like the parent account for that underlying set of sub services, I guess. They're almost like proxy services within a service. They're weird.
Right. And I'm in the same boat. Like, I sort of get it, but I feel like this information you shouldn't be going to the Azure Automation blade to view, or the service to view all of these. And what it is, like you said, it's change tracking inventory. What's changing on a server? Files that are changing, applications getting installed, like, it's literally going out and watching your servers and seeing what has changed on them. And then inventory is going to be what software is installed, what is actually sitting out on these servers. And as you had said, this runs in Azure Automation. It goes out and watches, monitors all this stuff, and then shoves the data up to log analytics. And currently / up until now, this has all used the log analytics agent, which is going away. Microsoft has been going towards this Azure monitoring agent. So it only made sense that at some point in time, the change tracking and inventory using that log analytics agent, the agent they've been using, would have to change. And back in December, this one's a little older, or at least the article was December 15. There is now a preview, or using the Azure Monitoring Agent preview, you can now get all this change tracking and inventory management using that new Azure Monitoring Agent instead of the old Log Analytics Agent. So a little bit of a shift. It'll come out of preview at some point in time because Log Analytics Agent is set to retire the middle of 2024. So you still have like a year and a half, but this is out in preview if you are using the Azure Monitoring Agent, or if you're using change tracking and inventory with the old agent, you may want to go take a look at this preview and test some things out in a non-production environment because it's preview for this change tracking and inventory with the new agent.
Yeah, so if you're using change tracking, like this is all out there in preview. In general, you should be starting to think about that transition for any of the log analytics agents over to the new Ask Me Anything agent, the AMA, or the Azure Monitor Agent. I don't know. It's AMA all the place in the documentation. So I'm always like, what am I asking that thing? Nothing. It's the Azure Monitor Agent.
Yes, it's like the WAF, WAF, and WAF, and WAF.
Oh, don't get me started on that one. we have debates about that all the time.
You mean the Web Application Framework, or the WAF Acceptance Factor, or the well-architected framework?
Yes, all three.
Or I'm sure we could come up with more. Yeah, and I think Azure Monitoring Agent itself is the Azure Monitoring Agent as a whole still in preview, or has that come out of preview for certain things? I feel like some of the log analytics stuff, like they're slowly rolling older log analytics stuff into the monitoring agent, but there are versions of the monitoring agent that are GA, right? Or am I just
Yes.
making stuff up?
No. So it's the agent is GA, but then capabilities within the agent are not. Like there's a subset of capabilities. So if you think about something like, if you're doing it in log analytics today, you would go in and maybe go into like your log analytics workspace, and then you have things like, what are my collection rules? Like, I don't know, like what are the registry keys I want to watch for on a given server, things like that. So what I want to watch in like Windows Event Viewer and trap into my log analytics workspace. That stuff is still sitting out there and still exists, and it all works under the Azure Monitor Agent as well. Like, boom, you've got data collection rules, like all good to go there. But then you look at something like this that we just talked about, and getting into change tracking and inventory tracking and some of those preview capabilities, those are still going to have to rely on data collection rules, but there could be data collection rules that like the data collection rule itself is in preview, which is a little bit weird because it's almost like the data you track is in preview, but not the underlying capability or the thing that pushes it out.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was just making sure that I wasn't crazy. So, yeah, go test it out. This is another one of those. It's kind of one of those cool. I don't know how many people know about this feature, have seen it. Again, to me, it's kind of buried in Azure Automation. But this is one I've played with and done demos before, and it can really come in handy to answer those questions of who changed what on my server when something broke. Because we've never had that experience where something breaks and everybody is like, I didn't change anything, and nobody knows what changed. Change tracking in Azure Automation.
I didn't change anything. You changed it. Yeah. That never happens around here.
No, at least, and it wouldn't necessarily tell you who changed it, but at least you would know what changed. Because that's the other thing, right? Is people are always like, I didn't change anything, and maybe they inadvertently changed something. It's Windows. I've seen it change itself. Let's be honest.
Windows changes itself. Underlying services change themselves. Yeah. Even things like your Azure Monitoring Agent can change itself. Like you just put it in auto update mode and let it run, and it's going to do some potentially wonky things to you.
Yeah. Defender updates itself and does wonky things to you.
Defender updates its definitions, which, we should be able to have faith in. But whatever. Way to bring it all back around.
I do my best, Scott. But with that, we should probably call it a day. I have some more run books and scripts to go write because I should have these done by the weekend is my goal.
All right. Well,
so
as always, thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Scott. And we will talk to you again next week.